Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? We shed a few years when I shed my goatee off yesterday. It's summertime after all. Trying to get that golden plump color, as it were. I like to slay in the sun if I can. Anyway, today we're going to talk about an interesting subject. Rare blue notes. And I first want to quantify this by saying I've been a moderator of two different Facebook jazz groups, one directly related to Blue Note and one just about jazz vinyl in a wider sense for 2-3 years now. And I've seen what people post from all over the world, and so I can go off not just my familiarity with the subject, but I can also go off in terms of what people post and buy and know about. And part of the Blue Note legacy, part of what's so impressive, and part of it's, of course, the remarketing of this label nowadays, and that sense that everyone needs to have Blue Note. And you do. If you're collecting jazz, you do need Blue Note. But you need Argo, Prestige, and Embassy as well. They don't have that same push behind them, that same chic hipness that drives their vinyl up to the thousands of dollars. And when I speak about the rarest Blue Notes, I'm talking about the ones you see posted the least, spoken about the least, the fewest people own, know, or buy. There's just very little chatter about these 10 artists. And part of what's so impressive here is how tough this was to do. Because stuff that would have seemed rare to me a few years ago, now that I have these groups and I moderate them, I see a lot of what people post, people know about. The Blue Note 80, Blue Note 75, Tone Poet, all these different series are republishing and issuing a lot of Blue Note stuff, and it really keeps a lot of it in people's mouths. There's a lot of constant chatter about Blue Note, Blue Note, Blue Note. And as there should be, it's the greatest label in jazz history. I don't think there's any debate in my mind. The message of the label was so unwatered down. It was so incredibly heavily the honest expression of young black youth in this country being allowed to voice, thanks to a couple Jewish guys who knew what oppression looked like and felt like. And Alfred and Frank really didn't pull any punches. Like, it's such a black affair. And I would encourage people, while you're watching this episode, pull up on your phone or on another screen, go to Wikipedia, Google Blue Note Records, and find the discography tab, and tap on that. And skip over the anything 78 related or the 10-inch series even, and just start at the 1500 series, look through that 99 records, and then go through the first couple hundred 4000 series records, which covers you from 55 to about 63, 64, into even the early 4200 series, which will take you into 65, 66. And the sale happens in 67 at 42.74. And at that point, the label's a different being. The art changes, the direction changes, the artists change. It's a whole different ball game post 42.74, and it just feels different immediately. The art department with Reed Miles leaving, it so changes the look of the label. Everything becomes kind of dated and trying to be hip. There's more of a sense of we're just going to use some pretty girls on the cover at times. It's Liberty and the United Artists now have control and final say. It's just such a stark change. So we don't really consider Blue Note past 1967 to be Blue Note. They might still have that logo on the black and blue, label logo. And there's a lot of great pressings and reissues that those United Artists do. Thank goodness. Liberty pressings are great, but when we're talking Blue Note, we're talking the canon, 1500 through 4274. I want that to be very clear, and that's still almost 400 records. It's an incredible body of work. And if you skim through that on your desktop, and I'll give you a brief overview of it here. That's 1,500 titles. And this just continues. That's all 1,500. Then it goes 4,000, 4,100. And of course, you can see I have all that stuff highlighted. And the only thing that's not highlighted are a few things that were never issued. Like Jack Knight never came out till much later. Stanley Turrentine and Change, those records never came out. And then there's a sale right around there. And I still have a lot of that stuff, but it certainly changes. And take a look through that body of work. And from your perspective, you tell me, how many of those titles are you unfamiliar with? And if you're even a second grade jazz collector beyond just the Miles Coltrane basic stuff, once you start getting even a little bit deeper, the Lou Donaldsons, the Hank Mobleys, the Grant Greens, the Kenny Drews, the Kenny Dorhams, the Jimmy Smiths, it's all lexicon. It's all such established, firm parts of the jazz canon. And everybody's collecting that stuff. Even the Jimmy Smith and Three Sounds stuff, people definitely know about it. It was popular stuff. So when it came time for me to pick out 10 rare Blue Notes or 10 rare Blue Note artists, just skimming through it, it's like, this is difficult. So much of this is commonplace in people's posts, you know, and so much of it gets reissued that it's kind of in the vocabulary all the time. And boy, you cannot say that for any other label. You just can't. Take labels like Argo and Emercy and wide swaths of that stuff, nobody will know. Riverside has a lot of records that OJC didn't reissue that nobody will know. Impulse has a lot of weird titles that have nothing to do with Coltrane and the avant-garde and the new thing. There's some weird stuff at Impulse. Verve's catalog is so expansive that few people are going to know all of it. A ton of the early Clef Norgren reissue stuff on Verve. Most people aren't going to know that stuff outside of the Parker, Billie Holiday kind of names like that. Then Verve, once Corey Taylor comes in, there's a lot of stuff that people aren't going to know. And it's the same for Atlantic, the same for, you go on down the line. Bethlehem, most fairly knowledgeable second, third tier jazz fans are going to look at the Bethlehem discography and they're like, oh, I know Dexter Gordon. Oh, I know Zut Sims. But most of it, they're going to skim through and be like, I don't know any of this stuff. And it's something you have to kind of get to it, dig it, and then realize how great some of these records are with Charlie Mariano and Claude and Stu Williamson. It's outstanding stuff. I've referenced it many times. Savoy is filled with records by artists you're not going to know. In between the Parkers and the Gillespies and the Fats Navarros, and then, you know, some Coleman Hawkins and eventually Cannonball Adderley, and there's some great, amazing stuff on Savoy. There's a ton of stuff that Lubinsky put out that you're not going to have any reference to unless you're a deep kind of collector like I am, OCD, compulsive, just want to have and understand the whole history of a label. But part of why I went down that road was once I dug into Blue Note, I realized the value of everything on Blue Note was so high. It was so great. And the integrity was so strong. And I wanted to see how universal that was. And it's to lesser degrees for some labels than others, for sure. But like I've said before many times, if you got into a recording studio in 1955, you could play. They didn't waste tape on guys that had no chops. It just didn't happen. So all these guys that are on these labels can play. It's just about how much promotion did they get, who did they play with, did anybody notice them, did they develop an audience. Most of the white artists that filled these label discographies have slipped between the cracks into obscurity, and I'd say most. I'm talking 85%. And a lot of great white jazz players came along that got records and were on these labels, and just history hasn't really remembered them the same way for one reason or the other. So when I came to picking the 10 Blue Note artists that people are going to be much less familiar with, again, it was a much tougher task that I envisioned. And I've kind of been envisioning this episode for a long time. It just never really came to fruition because I'm like, man, it's so difficult. How do I pick? They're all kind of on people's radar. So let's move in. Let's dig in. We're going to work from 10 down to number 1. 10 being the most common of these, artist-wise. And number 1 being, this is something that's hardly ever shows up in any of my Facebook groups, any of my conversations about jazz. Number 10, and again, this guy is fairly well known, is Don Wilkerson, the Texas Tornado. He plays in the soul, blues, jazz vein. There's a lot of great Texas tenor players, and if you listen to guys like Eddie Lockjaw Davis, a guy like Gene Ammons, he just has that same swinging, gritty, barbecue blues jazz. And it's definitely not hard bop. It's definitely not even the angry, militant East Coast New York early 90s rap hard bop of Blue Note. It's a much more swinging, like I said, blues-driven, barbecue-sounding, and I love Don Wilkerson's stuff. He also has a great record over at Riverside. He kind of disappears from the scene. I've read that he was on the circuit for a long time, just touring, and a lot of musicians didn't make their living recording. A lot of these guys made their living on the Chitlin circuit, toured the barbecue houses and the blues houses of the South, and finding work where they could. And if they were to play a barbecue joint, the percentage of the revenue they would bring into themselves is equal to that of what they would make making the trip to New York, recording a record for one of these labels. It was just not a way to make money as a recording artist. And it's still true today. A lot of musicians make their money touring, playing. And albums, unless you have the great contract, the labels are going to make most of that money, and you're going to spend your first 6 months of sales just paying what you borrowed to make that record from the label. That being said, Don Wilkerson's a great player, has a lot of swing, a lot of booty grooving. It's music to talk to girls to. You know what I mean? I got my Don Wilkerson on. Even guys like Junior Walker and the All-Stars on Motown. Louis Jordan's kind of a link to this, that jump shout transition of R&B, and Booker T and the MGs. There's this kind of transition where soul and the blues and jazz kind of all create this sound that sold decently, especially in black neighborhoods. A lot of this music was on 45, and they'd have jukeboxes filled with these artists, and for the most part, it's fantastic stuff. And I'm a little surprised Wilkerson's career wasn't longer than it is, just because he's such a fun player. The number 2 artist on my list here, a rare Blue Note artist you just don't see a lot, is the fantastic Lewis Smith. And the Wilkerson stuff shows up in the 4100 series, so 61, 62 in that vein. The Lewis Smith stuff is both in the 1500 series. 1594 is Smithville, and 1584 is Here Comes Lewis Smith. He's a great trumpet player. From my understanding, he went on to be a teacher for a long time. And then I guess he did make some records as a comeback artist. I was told by someone in the 80s or 90s that are supposed to be really fantastic. Buckshot LaFunk, who's playing on that. That's, of course, Cannonball Adderley's nom de plume. What is it? Duke Jordan, Tommy Flanagan, Doug Watkins, Art Taylor. Pretty outstanding lineup on that one. This one's got Louis Smith, Charlie Routes on the tenor, Sonny Clark, Paul Chambers, and Art Taylor. And we always love Sonny Clark sightings. Sonny Clark's going to ensure you some solid rhythm and groove. He's a fantastic player. He's got a lot of brightness. He's He's got a lot of the blues in him, even some church in his vibe and his feel. He seems like a very light-hearted, gentle-spirited guy. And again, you look at those two pictures of the fella, and this is not the somber negativity of Miles, but it's more of a bright positivity and an optimism that stems back to Armstrong. I hope you guys watched that episode I did yesterday on the Last Supper of Jazz. Those are 15 artists that every collection and every collector should have. Get to know those guys. They're the foundation of this whole music in so many ways. Cannonball, sorry, it's Charlie Rouse, sounds wonderful there. That's beautiful. And of course, Charlie Rouse and Les Moe make some great records, and Rouse plays with Monk for a long time. And I don't think anybody really plays with Monk better than Charlie Rouse as a horn player. I think Monk disoriented a lot of his horn players over the years, just in terms of he was a tough guy to follow. Number 3, or going backwards, number 8, Herbie Nichols. This brother is a friend of Monk from a young age. He's a fantastic piano player. There's elements of Bud Powell, lots of Thelonious Monk, some of the elegance even of a Bill Evans, an intricate player. I find Herbie Nichols a delight to listen to. He does have a couple sessions on Blue Note as a 10-inch artist as well. And then he makes a great record at Bethlehem in probably 1959. And that's a tough record to come by. It took me a while to track that one down. I love Herbie Nichols, and I think he firmly belongs in the discussion as one of the great players of this era. He certainly doesn't get much recognition, yet being Blue Note, he's having a bit of a resurgence, it feels like. You do see some of his 10-inch stuff being reissued. He's certainly a deeper artist than most Blue Note artists are, but I love this record, and I love everything else I have by him. And Herbie Nichols is a guy to look for. He will be an interesting listen every time. You'll hear something you never noticed before. It's gorgeous. Full of life, full of vibrancy, full of an energy. He's it's wonderful, and I enjoy being able to refer artists like this to people, because we need to have deeper collections than just Bill Evans and Miles Davis and those surface guys. They're all valuable and important, but there's a lot of great players out there. Number 7 on my list is a guy that you have to kind of be a deeper collector to know. He's a great player, without question, J.R. Montrose. And I believe he's from the Chicago school. I know he plays with Ira Sullivan and some of those cats quite a lot. He only makes 2 records as a leader that I know of. One of them is on a little label by the name of Jaro, and then he makes this Blue Note. And 1536, it's early in the 1500 series. And what's interesting is all the white artists that Blue Note does record end up being pretty obscure. And this guy has a name in circles, but people who drop the name J.R. Montrose have a fairly deep knowledge of jazz. They usually know much more than just the New York modern school and just the post-hard bop Miles era. If you know J.R. Montrose, you've definitely been around this music for some time. But he's a great player, and he's worth looking for. Number 6 on my list is a guy by the name of Leo Parker. And if I recall, he might also be a Texas sax player. He's a baritone guy. And for the most part, baritone players don't get a lot of recognition unless you're Jerry Mulligan or Pepper Adams. A lot of the other great baritone players like Serge Chaloff and Leo Parker live in obscurity. And what's strange is I think the baritone's a wonderful toned instrument. It's got a big, brisk, hearty, but still kind of soft and gentle in a way. You know, it's full, but it's not abrasive. And Parker does make 2 records on Blue Note. This one's 4087, and this one's 4095. And if I'm not mistaken, this one, Rollin' with Leo Parker, doesn't get issued till the Japanese put it out. Yeah, I think it wasn't released until 1980 in Japan, this one. So there's so much Blue Note stuff that sits in the vaults that most other labels would die for. And Blue Note will sit on it, and often it was obviously just because of money and the demands and who sold well. This one probably didn't sell well enough to justify putting this one out. But it was given a sequence number, 4095, so it was definitely intended to come out. And it's been issued in several different formats over the years. But the Japanese actually gave this one its original number and artwork. Great stuff. Really rich player. And if I recall, he dies quite young, Leo Parker. It says here he died in 1962 when he was 37, which is really sad. But that's also one of the trademarks of the black male in this country, is short lifespan. Between the homicides and there's not a lot of suicide in the black community, honestly, but between the homicides and the conditions and the poverty and the lack of health care and the lower food quality, in America, there's a big difference between what the elite eat and what the poor eat. When you are the poor, you eat fast food, you eat from the big box stores, just packaged food, frozen food, a lot of chemicals and preservatives, a lot of food that shouldn't be eaten is consumed by the lower classes in this country. And even the school systems, what they feed the public school kids versus what private school kids get to eat. And food is brain food. What you put in your body determines your lifespan in so many ways. It's something I'm trying to remember, and I'm trying to eat healthy, and it's a struggle, but it's something that the black community struggles with a lot. And black mortality is not a joke. These guys die young in the best cases. And I think the life expectancy between a black male and a white male in this country is 7-8 years difference, which is pretty dramatic for people who live next door to each other in the same fucking country. Parker's a great player, a guy worth digging out if you see him. Number 5, I believe we're on, is a guy that I feel like has been reissued a number of times. I know Classic Records has done some. I think Blue Note 80's done some. And that's a great organ player by the name of Babyface Willette. And Babyface actually does some side work at Blue Note as well. I think he does some stuff with Grant Green. And he's there for probably 2 years. He gets 2 records as a leader. But make no mistake about it, I've read in numerous publications and sources that these were 2 of the poorest selling Blue Notes in their original release. He's probably been hired on in some way to help replace the departure of Jimmy Smith, who got hired by Verve, and that just guts Blue Note in a large way financially. Although this is probably 59, this one is recorded, and this one's probably 60. And so Jimmy Smith's probably on his way out the door at that point. But Willette comes to the label, and remember that Blue Note has vaults of Jimmy Smith stuff. And so even though they've hired some new organ guns like John Patton and Freddie Roach, Babyface Willette, and eventually Larry Young, it doesn't mean that they're not going to still be putting out Jimmy Smith material, even though he's left for Verve. And they issue Jimmy Smith stuff pretty much every 3, 4, 5 months. Blue Note puts out Jimmy Smith organ records up into the mid-60s. And so if you came to Blue Note as an organ player like Babyface Willette, your chances of being fairly well purchased when Jimmy Smith's still being available to people, plus Verve stuff's going to start showing up, it's going to be tough to crack into that market. Grant Green's actually on this one with Ben Dixon. A lot of organ stuff ends up being trios because the organ players are playing the highs and the mids, plus they're playing the bass with their feet. Great guy. I've heard he's a really kind-hearted, spirited gentleman. And like I said, I've read numerous publications that these records sold very poorly and are some of the hardest original Blue Notes to find. These are both classic records reissues from the early thousands, which did a great record. They're on par with Tone Poet for the sound quality. They had the deep groove. They do a nice job on the covers with the original look to them. And some of the research I've done over the years to try to understand what a poor-selling Blue Note is, they probably sold in the area of 5,000 to 8,000 copies of these originally, which is pretty minuscule and makes them pretty tough to come by. Number 4 of rare Blue Note artists, and I just did an episode of him not long ago, is Gil Mel. And Gil Mel does have 4 10-inches that predate this album. And if you watch my episode, you'll remember Gil Mel's trajectory brought Gil Mel into Hollywood eventually. But he's a sax player. He's a white guy. And again, the white cats that are on Blue Note, whether it's Jerry Montrose, whether it's Gil Mel, we got one more coming up here that I'll show you next. They just didn't have the same marketing, and I think that goes more today with how Blue Note's marketed than at the time. I think that today there's a recognition by the industry, by the marketing people who own Blue Note, of the legacy that's the black music of jazz. And even though it's not super spoken about, I don't think even a lot of these people get it consciously. Subconsciously, people pick up when they listen to Blue Note, the black experience. And there's a power to it. There's a tangible story that we've never heard told before. And no other label quite grasps it. And when I say no other label, I'm saying no one else is even close. No one else is even close to knocking out the black experience so succinctly, so continuously, release after release after release. Look at the discography. From Sonny Clark to Stanley Turrentine, there's a 10-year swath of nothing but iconic recordings, LP after LP after LP after LP, and you gotta dig hard to find the artists that slipped through the cracks. You gotta dig. And most of the artists who just slipped through the cracks were the few white artists that Blue Note recorded. This is a fantastic record by a German piano player named Jutta Hipp. And Jutta, from my understanding, was an old friend of Alfred and Frank's back in Germany. And I can't remember, she might have been a friend of one of their friends, or she might have been a direct friend. I gotta remember, look that up sometime. But I know there was a connection to her back in Germany. And they brought her over, and she's a fantastic piano player. Of course, what you're hearing there is Zoot Sims, who doesn't make a lot of appearances at Blue Note. Zoot Sims is not very frequently in-house here. But again, he's a white guy playing with a white piano player from Germany. And so there seems to be, even in these days at Blue Note, we'll get white guys to play with him. Although Abdul Malik's on the bass, Ed Thigpen's on the drums, and Jerry Lloyd's on the trumpet, who I don't have any idea who that is, honestly. Jerry Lloyd. Can't tell if that's black or white, I don't know. But this record has kind of gained a new recognition in the last 10 years. It's been reissued several times. There was a really nice Japanese pressing that was available that was like $70. I think Music Matters also did this one. And this has kind of put her back somewhat in the light to some degree. But you can collect jazz for a long time. I have never heard a Yuta hip. And I think that's true for all these records I'm showing you. Before that one came out, 1516 and 1515 were two other Yuta hip records. Live at the Hickory House. And this has Peter Ind on the bass. Sounds like a Swede. Yuta hip on the piano and Ed Thigpen on the drums, who's a brother. And these are great records. Again, they're just piano trio stuff. This gal can really play. She's got great chops. And she's got a great groove behind her. And again, soloists are at the mercy of their rhythm section. They truly are. So these three Yuta hip records are all worth looking for. And they're nice parts of the Blue Note canon, but they're certainly some of the rare titles. You know, and they all come, this and the Monteros are the four white records by white artists in the 1500 series, and they're all some of the rarest Blue Notes. And it's just part of how the history's played out. It's, even to people who aren't really cognizant of it, there's just a value to the Blue Note black expression that they might not be able to put a thumb on it, but you can feel it. You can feel it on those Donald Byrd records. You can feel it on those Lee Morgan records. You can feel it in all those hard bop records, just a seething energy. And the White Cats can play with the same degree of virtuosity, even more so, but their expression from what their soul is saying is coming from a very different place. Number 2, Sabu, Paulo Congo, Sabu Martinez. He's a Congo player. I think he's from Cuba, if I recall. And this is a strange record. What you're hearing is what you're going to hear on this record. And they do some drum stuff with Blakey, Drum Orgy, and some of those rhythm drum records. But most of those records have some horns on them and some structure. This one's very much an island, African jungle feast record. It's music for a luau. And I don't listen to it very often. It's 1561. I guess he did a record with Horace Silver, where I first kind of saw him. Excuse me, dry throat. But Sabu is definitely one of the weirdest records in the Blue Note discography. Certainly one of the toughest to find. That was a Japanese, I'm not sure if it's King Press or Sony, but it's a Japanese copy, no question. The Japanese pretty much issued everything by Blue Note and did a nice job of it. I've never seen an old copy of this ever. I can't imagine this one sold very well at all. It doesn't really have a jazz swing to it. It has more of a tribal, and even the drums, has vocals, congas by Alvaristo Barro, Ray Mosquito Romero on the congas. A lot of conga players going on here. And it's, this is what it is. And it's a tough record to find, and it's certainly not one you see posted much in jazz groups and Facebook groups, and people aren't talking about a whole lot. And for the most part, the conga is a Latin-tinged instrument. Gillespie, of course, brought fame to it with his bringing in the Latin sounds. But for the most part, the conga is going to be an accompanying instrument and not really set up to be a whole record of that. And in that same vein, and I think this is easily the rarest Blue Note, and it has been reissued. I think Blue Note 80 actually reissued this record, which has made a few people go out and buy it. But Solomon Olori, he's an African gentleman from Nigeria. He's got some guitar, and I think it's Montego Joe. Looks like Solomon Olori plays some guitar on this too. It's very much in the African tradition. There's island music that has this vibe to it. It's got a great cover. I like the use of the fuchsia and the orange and the white. It looks like candy a little bit. It's great Reed Miles art. Under direction of Coleridge Perkinson. But I think without any question, this is the rarest Blue Note. I'd be surprised if this thing sold 5,000 copies in its original release era. 4136. So by that time the label has grown some. We're talking probably 1962. And I'd have to guess that the sales were probably a little better by 62, just because distribution had to be increasing. But again, Blue Note was going between the black and the red constantly. They were relying on the Three Sounds and Jimmy Smith to keep them afloat. And yet Alfred still took the time to release interesting stuff like this. Ethnic Congo music from the Caribbean and from Africa, with messages of African love song, God's work is indestructible, look at this beautiful girl, the troubled world. So it's still the cry of an oppressed people trying to find their voice in this world. And Alfred was always going to give that some time and some listen. So Solomon O'Laurie, I think without question, is the rarest Blue Note. And it's a great record. I like it quite a lot. I don't listen to it very often. But it was the one thing that whenever I was thinking about this episode, and I thought about it for a while, that was always the first one upon my mind. Solomon O'Laurie is definitely there. And then you think of Yoda Hip, and then Monteros, and then Sabo Martinez. And then they got those next five, the Leo Parkers, Don Wilkersons, the Lewis Smiths. Those were a little tougher, but compared to the next tier on Blue Note, they were just less popular, and still are today. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that episode, a nice little rundown of the rarest Blue Note titles. Y'all be safe, have a great day, enjoy the sun, be safe, peace.